Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. Make sure you've got a belt and suspenders for backup, sponsored by Unitrends. I'm Tracy Cook with Redmond Magazine, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Just a couple of things before we get started. We encourage you to ask questions during the live webcast today. We'll hold a Q&A session after the two presentations. This webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. And to access the replay, you can use the same link you used today. And now on to the webcast. Up a little later is Adam Marquette, Technical Specialist for Unitrends Field Marketing Team, supporting digital and in-market events. He has been with Unitrends for 3 years, during which time he's been delighted at the opportunity to work with customers, prospects, and partners alike to solve challenges around business continuity. And leading us off today is Senior Resultant Howard M. Cohen, a 35-plus year executive veteran of the IT industry. He is a writer, presenter, and advisor to a wide variety of companies. He also serves on many vendor advisory panels, and he refers to himself as a senior resultant because he has always understood that we are all measured only by our results. So it's great to have Adam and Howard together, and I'd like to pass the event over to Howard. Howard, please take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. And, good morning to everybody, I think, based on what time it is. No, that's right. It's good afternoon for some of you. Hello, everybody. And those of you who thought this was the before and after picture, well, no, it's not that. It's Adam and me. Today's session is all about the data. As a matter of fact, everything in our lives in IT is all about the data. The data is it's the object of our desire. It is the thing that provides us with profit. It is the lifeblood of our businesses. And so we are very jealous about it. We are very protective of it. And, well, we should be. I'm now going to ask you a very silly question. Why do we back up data? And the question really isn't so silly when you start to think about the underlying reason. I mean, we back up data so that we have another copy in case the first one has a problem. But the ramifications, the consequences of losing data are pretty severe, more than many of you may think. For example, a statistic that says that 70% of small firms go out of business within a year after a large data loss incident. 7 out of 10. So when you see a hurricane come through and knock out a whole bunch of businesses, stop and think about the fact that 7 out of 10 of those businesses are done. They're finished. It's a frightening prospect. And even if they're not small businesses, the average cost of a data center outage across all businesses is in excess of $9,000 per minute. It's an expensive thing to have happen to you. So the solution to all of that, of course, is to back up the data. Make a copy of it. Now, then when you have a problem, no problem. You've got lost original data. You replace it with the backup data. Just that simple. However, here are the many reasons that data is lost. The big one, hardware malfunction, 44% of it, followed by human error, and then followed by the software going bad, viruses being introduced, and actually natural disasters only represent about 3% of the issue. However, when you look at hardware malfunction, and when you look at human error, the two biggies, you could say the same about backup data as you could about live primary data. The fact is that these things, and actually all the others, could be the cause of damage to a backup. A hardware malfunction in a tape drive or a disk drive, a human error, a person forgetting to launch the daily backup or to readjust the backup based on time. any of these could cause damage not only to your primary data, but also to your backup data, which is what gave rise to the famous battle cry of the IT champion. The data backed up, but will it restore? Dun, 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 dun. It's actually a frightening question. You don't know. It backed up. It completed the backup. Unfortunately, the only time you're going to know if it will restore is when you try to restore it. Now, that could be when you have a problem, and that's the worst time. The data has been damaged, corrupted. It's unavailable to you now. You need that backup restored, and it's not working. That is the worst of all possible outcomes, which is why we always encourage everybody, test it regularly. Now, test it regularly. That's a great idea. However, 25% of you never test it, according to a survey taken in 2018. Never. Another 25%, or another quarter or so, only test it once a year. So you take those two, that's half of businesses out there that are really just not testing their backups very often or at all. A quarter test quarterly, that's pretty good. And about 20% test monthly, which is better. It's actually very good. But that's only 20%, 19%. So, testing is not a habit that a lot of companies have gotten into. It is not a best practice that is actually executed in many places. So if you're not going to test, well, then what's your alternative? And the alternative is kind of like it's kind of like when you invite everybody over for football, and then all of a sudden a lot more people show up, and unfortunately you only had one six-pack of beer. You really need more than one. You need a backup of your backup, okay, and maybe multiple backups of your backup, so the odds are better that one of them will indeed restore. We refer to this as belt and suspenders backup. You never see a guy dressed like this. Most men don't wear both braces and a belt. Okay, they wear one or the other. The belt and suspenders concept was introduced 40 years ago, 50 years ago, to say we need to do at least two things to make sure we hold on to the data. Belt and suspenders backup is a good idea. This has been more recently expressed. Well, I'm sorry, I forgot to list the belts and suspenders. We have tape, we have disk. More recently, we introduced something called remote data backup. Remote data backup then got renamed cloud backup. It's still remote data backup. It goes across some conveyance to another data center other than your own, and it's backed up there, which is off-site. In the very, very old days, we used to use a protocol called FTAM, FTAM, to do our off-site backup. FTAM standing for Ford Truck Access Method. We would have a truck come to the business every day and pick up the tape. Now, we were hoping that if there was no tape available, the person responsible for the tape would be embarrassed, and that would motivate them to do their backup consistently. And in some cases, it worked. But nowadays, you have many other choices, including the choice of a cloud data center. Well, we now, instead of calling it just belt and suspenders, we now have, of course, a numeric mnemonic for it, which is the 3-2-1 rule. The 3-2-1 rule tells us that you ought to have at least 3 copies of your data at all times. Okay, 3 copies. One of them, the working copy, your primary data. The other 2, backups, at least 2 backups, and maybe more. The 2 of the copies should be on local devices, the primary and one of your backups. So maybe you're backing up to tape still. Maybe you're backing up to disk. Maybe you're just backing up from one server to another server. And then, of course, the other backup would be off-site or in the cloud, which kind of means the same thing. So it's 3 copies, 2 local, 1 remote, and that should be fairly good protection. Now, when you're talking about cloud backup, of course, most cloud providers have redundant data centers. I mean, the larger ones have hundreds of them, and they will replicate your data in several of them, sometimes two, sometimes three, sometimes more. In this way, if there is a true catastrophe that takes off half the planet, there are data centers elsewhere that can restore your data. Of course, if that's your primary worry, you're very fortunate if it takes out part of the planet. But that notwithstanding, you're talking about very serious backup data protection in the cloud when you use the right cloud services. And of course, cloud services should be a blend. There should be multiple different kinds of backup that take place. Some cloud providers have introduced a service in which they take their cloud backup, and if something goes wrong with your primary data and your primary servers are down, they can simply spin up that backup into being a live server right then and there. So you have immediate restoration. You have almost nonstop computing. So the ability to spin up a cloud into a live, active, accessible server is a really big boon to a lot of companies who need that quick, rapid response, but don't have the budget to build their own redundant data center and have multiple redundant servers. It's an expensive proposition. Okay. My last big reminder would be, remember to back up everything. Don't just back up your servers. Many people keep some files, some important stuff on a local device, especially when you're talking about mobile devices. Some people have it on their desktop. Other people have some personal stuff that they want to make sure is still available to them. They keep it on their laptops, certainly on handheld devices. There's plenty of data there that they're using as they're moving through their day. And if any of you happen to be carrying tricorders, absolutely, back that thing up. And I'd like to talk to you about that because that'd be interesting. Okay, so if you're backing up everything, all your devices, if you're backing up in a 3-2-1 mode where you have your live copy and at least one local backup, and then one or more remote backups, then and only then can you consider sleeping soundly again. Because then and only then can you achieve the peace of mind that comes from knowing you've got belt and suspenders backup. With that, I'm going to hold off on questions, and instead I'm going to introduce Adam Margette, who is going to tell you about some powerful solutions that will enable you to have belt and suspenders. Adam?
Howard, thank you very much, and good afternoon, good morning. Hello to everyone that joined us here. And Howard, thank you so much for outlining, I think in a lot of cases, a lot of best practices. And I even saw someone, chatting in a little bit, how do we test restore or test our recovery? And it's so critically important. As Howard had mentioned, we're seeing an increased shift in the overall monetization of data, and behind employees and people, really the second most valuable asset within an organization. So I apologize for jumping ahead there. But again, my name is Adam Margette. I'm a technical specialist. I've been with Unitrends now a little over 3 years. And before we talk about the company or the solutions that we provide, just wanted to relay in kind of real numbers here, kind of the pressure that's facing IT professionals today. What you're looking at here is some research from Cloudendure. They're an AWS service provider partner, and they conduct an annual kind of state of the cloud annual report. And what they've found is that steadily over the last 3 years, the service availability goals, the uptime demands of the business unit that IT serves and what we're trying to achieve has increased significantly. A small majority of organizations are striving to achieve that 3 to 4 to 5 nines of availability. And in relation to what Howard had explained is that average cost of unplanned systems downtime, even with 4 nines of availability per month, you're still looking at about an average of 4 minutes. They can still have a fairly significant cost to an organization. But here at Unitrends, we recognize that no 2 downtime events look the same, and whether you need to recover individual items, granular files and folders, recover your virtual guests, the applications that are running, or have means to recover your entire site, you're going to be able to do all of that with Unitrends. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about what we offer in terms of your sort of belt and suspenders for today's technology. But the other gap that we have noticed, in addition to facing more risk and increased demands from the business units that we've served, in a lot of cases we're operating in this less is more landscape, and increasingly budgets are decreasing, headcount is decreasing, but the demands of availability or application performance are still incredibly high. But when we see folks encountering challenges in meeting those service availability goals, it might be a depletion or an inefficiency of IT resources. Hey, our organization has been really investing heavily, and they're providing us with a lot of OpEx budget to drive applications and new implementation. We don't necessarily have the same support for that capital expense to maintain our solutions or continue to keep our data center hardware up to par or current. Limitations from a budgetary standpoint certainly play in there, and when we look at where some of the data is going with increased adoption of SaaS applications and cloud-based workloads, organizations that find they don't have necessarily the expertise to get the greatest or the most optimized use out of those platforms are suffering and find the consequences. Ultimately, what we have seen is that still a minority, a fairly significant minority, 11% of data center data is still going without adequate protection, and that's even more so in branch offices. So when we look at some of these challenges, that vitally important information that our organization is generating is potentially at risk. Which really brings us to Unitrends, and that risk and ultimately disaster recovery is what we have been striving to enable our customers with solutions for the last 30 years. We're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, originally founded in 1989 in Columbia, South Carolina. And now today, more than 30,000 customers across the globe trust Unitrends for their data protection and disaster recovery needs. With a combination of our hardware and software solutions, we're protecting 2 exabytes of customer data locally. And with the Unitrends Cloud, a proprietary manufacturer's operated solution, we are managing and protecting over 100 petabytes of customer data in the Unitrends Cloud. I do like to tip my cap and really acknowledge our support organization. Unitrends support is entirely U.S.-based. They're co-load with our research and product development teams for a truly unified experience. That 98% customer satisfaction rating that's posted here on the slide is not a stat that we cherry-picked from our best month a couple of years ago, but it's an ongoing rolling metric, something that has a tremendous amount of investment and visibility throughout our organization. You can see an example, just a couple of the Stevie Awards that we've won year over year for that customer support organization. But as Howard had mentioned, there are a lot of kind of components here when it comes to creating multiple backups, adhering to that 3-2-1 rule, the ability to test that data. And your environment may look something like this kind of over here on the right, and the different colors represent kind of the different manufacturers or the different pieces that have potentially been stitched together. A lot of customers that we are working with have kind of inherited or have evolved, and they found that their backup and their disaster recovery plans sort of been Frankenstein together. We had originally invested in a solution to protect our physical x86 tenants. About a decade ago, we started to virtualize. Well, hey, the product that we were using to protect the physical didn't integrate great with the virtual piece. We've started to invest in a secondary point product locally. Now we're looking at getting that data off-site. Have we invited a cloud vendor, another sort of service provider into the mix? And ultimately, how are we testing that backup? As folks have been kind of Frankensteining or piecing together these solutions, we consider that at Unitrends here inviting in unnecessary complexity and risk, where you're burdened or your staff is burdened with the day-to-day tuning and management of systems, and potential risks of interoperability. We apply a patch to a system over here. Is that going to break some of the connections that we've made that our solution is reliant on? And even from a restore perspective, hey, we're failing to recover this snapshot and restore one of our virtual guests. We call up our software vendor. They say, no, that's an issue with the storage device. You've got to call the hardware guys. You call them up, you're getting the same story. No, that's definitely a software issue, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. You've got to call your software provider. We strive to eliminate all of that burden, that task with Unitrends, providing an all-in-one solution. Trying to drive that simplicity and streamline a lot of the bulk operations when it comes to the backup and recovery environment. When we talk about all-in-one, I really could mean it in a couple of different ways. First off, from a local perspective, you've got an all-in-one solution for the entire environment. We're flexible in how you can deploy Unitrends with either hardware or software locally, and we have compatibility with over 250 operating systems, applications, hypervisors, and clouds. You can leverage Unitrends to perform file-level backups, host-level protection of your virtual guests, capture specific application information such as SQL databases, truncate those log files, as well as being able to back up public cloud instances or even workloads that you have running in the cloud. With that solution, Unitrends is responsible for backup and recovery of the entire local infrastructure. You've got a single phone call and a single point of contact when anything were to go awry. The appliances are a capacity-based model. They come provisioned with the backup software already pre-tuned and pre-installed, as well as the compute storage and memory resources to orchestrate local backup and recovery processes. If you're looking to leverage existing compute and storage, you deploy our software or can deploy our software as a virtual appliance on top of your favorite hypervisor. It is, as Howard had mentioned, critically important to get that data off-site, and there are a few different ways in which you can do so with Unitrends. If you're looking for the ability to recover off-site, you can leverage a site-to-site replication methodology in which you are replicating backup copies from one Unitrends appliance to another, and you can mix and match hardware to hardware, software to hardware, and so forth, depending on the resources available at that secondary site. As I had mentioned, you can deploy our software as well through the AWS or the Azure marketplaces, both as a replication target as well as an instance to protect any running workloads you may have in public cloud environments. Now, if you're looking to use the Unitrends cloud, that's going to bring us to that bottom left quadrant here. And the Unitrends cloud is a solution that's been purpose-built, designed to offer our customers long-term data retention, in which we are storing the backup copies for you within an SSAE 18 certified environment, data encrypted in flight and at rest. You've got the ability to recover backup copies from the Unitrends cloud target at any time with no egress fees. You can also archive into cheap and deep storage buckets through public cloud interface, as well as replicating data to removable media such as disk, tape, another storage device, be it a NAS or a SAN. The last piece in that bottom right quadrant, the disaster recovery as a service, would be recovery in the cloud from a Unitrends perspective. And our cloud team would handle the failover and the booting of the instances that are living within the cloud. It's what we call our white glove service. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move later on through the presentation. But again, when we look at kind of the overall fit of Unitrends, just to put this in the context of your environment, we've deployed either that physical or that virtual appliance to protect the local environment. Again, your physical servers, virtual servers, NAS-based storage, as well as those specific application workloads that are running. You can replicate that data to what we would consider a cold backup copy, a removable media, or another storage device, or replicate to the hot site, another Unitrends appliance, or the Unitrends cloud, where the backups are immediately available and ready for recovery. Howard had mentioned the 3-2-1 rule and kind of that age-old rule from our forefathers in backup and recovery. At Unitrends, our best practice would look something more like a 4-2-2. You've got 4 copies of that data, one, of course, the production copy. 2 of those copies are in different formats, production, the backup copy, and 2 of those are going off-site. And again, you could achieve this through replication to one of those removable or cold targets, as well as replication to the warm recovery site. A lot of different ways and flexibility in how you can architect the Unitrends solution to best fit your needs. From a local perspective, there were a couple of pieces that I like to call out when it comes to simplicity and the ways in which we've enabled folks to streamline some of their local operations. The first is through our SLA policies. We recognize that in a lot of cases, because backup is sort of our insurance policy and it's not ultimately driving productivity, It's not something that we want to spend a ton of time tinkering and managing here. As you're establishing the service availability goals with the business units that you serve and determining recovery point and recovery time objectives, as you're identifying those critical machines, you can group them into what we call our SLA policies. The SLA policy is a way to set a schedule based not on the time of taking backups, but on that RPO or that frequency. In essence, what's our tolerance for data loss on these machines? If we can only afford 15 minutes of data loss, we can't afford to lose more than 15 minutes, set an SLA policy with an RPO of 15 minutes to be taking those backups along with that schedule. It's going to leverage our incremental forever strategy, which is a way in which we're enabling users to meet more aggressive recovery point and recovery time objectives. The first backup will be a full. All subsequent backups will be incrementals, keeping those backup windows short. To keep recovery times short, the Unitrend system will automatically superimpose backups on top of the full and stitch together synthetic full points for you to keep those backup groups at a manageable length. You can also, in this single operational step, up to include backup copies to be automatically created and replicated to any configured hot or cold targets. So we can define our scheduling here, our replication, and ensure that backup groups are maintained at a manageable length through the creation of those synthetic fulls. You can certainly come in and still schedule out your differential backups, your transaction log backups. Not everything in the environment may be the right fit for an SLA policy, but I'd just like to make mention of it because it's a feature of ours that really has excited customers when they look at the ability to streamline some of those operations. We also, with the goal of meeting very aggressive RTOs, and that near zero RTO where downtime is something that so many organizations can't afford, enable some proactive measures to be taken through the creation of replicas. When Unitrends creates a replica, it's a standby copy of a Windows client or a VMware guest that's stored in an alternate location. It's going to be updated with every backup and ready to be brought live at a moment's notice. You can bring the replica, spin it up directly on the appliance in audit mode to test the viability, benchmark, RTO, RPO of that replica, ensure that it's receiving backups correctly. But in the event of client or guest level failure, boot that replica into live mode to assume the role of a failed server or failed virtual machine, and you can store multiple recovery points for these replicas. They're fairly storage efficient, so our customers tell us they will store, in some cases, hundreds of recovery points to be available through the creation of their replicas. Upon creation, there are no compute or memory resources being consumed, just storage. It's only when you boot into audit or live mode would you be leveraging host or appliance resources for compute. The last piece, really, when it comes to that local protection is how we're arming and enabling our customers to augment their existing cybersecurity posture against the threat of ransomware. We certainly wouldn't recommend that you replace traditional AV, firewall, user awareness training, spam filters, etc. with Unitrends, but again, we're a great complement to some of the existing cybersecurity measures that you have in place. The majority of ransomware variants that have been observed are targeting Windows-based systems, and in some cases they're even using PowerShell or attempting to go in through the Windows command line interface to interact and start to spread that malicious code through those machines. Unitrends is architected on a hardened Linux OS kernel, a CentOS kernel, and that serves us a couple of advantages. It's not to say that ransomware hasn't been written to go after Mac operating systems and applications or Linux, but they're significantly fewer and further between. Linux is a little bit more flexible in how you can build out those storage repositories and partitions. So we are landing backups in an immutable storage repository. It is a read-only repo where the backup copies are being stored read-only from our appliance. Even if Windows binary was backed up into that repository, Windows binary is not going to execute in that space against Linux-based file extensions. It's not to say that we haven't created a bad backup, but in our 30 years of being in business, we have never lost an appliance or had an appliance compromised by malware or a ransomware infection. We also on the front end have a machine learning algorithm, a predictive analytics engine that will establish baseline patterns of behavior for the clients in your environment that Unitrends is protecting. As we've worked and helped customers recover from ransomware attacks, we've noticed some common changes. The encryption at sometimes can be messy and it leaves traces. Change rates are certainly one indicator, but we've also observed what we call high Shannon entropy, a real randomness in that data as those files are being encrypted and all those extensions are being rewritten. The appliance, against those characteristics and a couple of others looking at the density, certainly levels of encryption, establishes baseline patterns for the machines that it's protecting within your environment. When those baselines are broken, potentially identifying threat conditions or anomalous activity, it triggers an alert through our UI dashboard, our email alerts. You can capture trap notifications here as well, identifying the source of the alert, a timestamp, and the potentially infected systems. It's enabled our users to go in and investigate the activity, start to review logs and change to identify, hey, was this patient zero? Do we have other clients where we've observed that anomalous behavior? Quarantine those machines and wipe them. Once disconnected and wiped, you're leveraging Unitrends recovery assurance testing application-level sandbox backup tests against the backup files to identify clean points of restore. And we're going to talk a little bit more about recovery assurance as we move along here. But a customer of ours that has benefited and has leveraged Unitrends to recover from a ransomware attack. Just one example here is Exco Engineering. They're a large die-cast metal manufacturer up in Newmarket, Ontario, just outside of Toronto. A lot of the equipment that they are developing is used in the automotive industry. Before leveraging Unitrends, they were rotating LTO tapes off-site. Really key to their operations was a main file server. It's a little over 3 terabytes of data, over 2 million unique files, and writing that full backup of that server to tapes was taking more than 72 hours to complete. So they were looking for a faster, more efficient way to be able to do things. They opted to deploy the Unitrends, one of our purpose-built backup appliances. They replaced LTO tapes with removable disks so they could still rotate off-site, as well as replicating to the Unitrends cloud and enrolling some of their mission-critical machines in our disaster recovery as a service. Months after deploying Unitrends, that main file server was hit with a crypto virus that essentially shut down the manufacturing floor. They were alerted to the infection and able to investigate, identify that clean point of restore. They were able to recover that file server within 18 hours. And the IT director, Erica Reyes, told us that we would have been lucky if we had been able to be up and running in 3 days, maybe a week, if we were trying to recover off of those LTO tapes. Unitrends had us back in under a full day. It was about 18 hours to bring that machine, restore it, and put it back into production. Just one story there and a case study, Exco Engineering, that you can check out on unitrends.com if you'd like to read a little bit more about that particular instance here. I also wanted to talk about the Unitrends Cloud, and I had mentioned earlier that it is designed for our customers' long-term retention and disaster recovery as a service. Again, we are not AWS, we are not Azure, but it is a proprietary manufacturer's operated environment. So we're operating and maintaining the back-end infrastructure. There's not a great deal of expertise required. It's a straightforward licensing model, and there are no fees for egress. One of the use cases that has really started to get popular as the workforce is increasingly is becoming more increasingly dispersed, I should say, is that endpoint or that user backup. We are very, very close. Studies indicate that by as soon as the middle of next year, by June, July of 2020, we could be producing as much, if not more, intellectual property outside of the traditional data center than inside of it. But that valuable IP that is living on those machines still needs to be protected, and we've seen that branch offices and remote locations are some of the cases where data protection certainly suffers. Delivered from the Unitrends Cloud is our Unitrends Cloud Backup. It is a direct-to-cloud backup for Windows-based endpoints. So you'll install a lightweight, hardened version of our file-level agent on a PC that links directly with a cloud target in the Unitrends data center. You've got your own interface to perform granular self-service recover from any location with an internet connection, restore that file structure to the same PC or another PC that has the Unitrends agent installed. It's a It's an offering that we're managing that back-end storage environment. So you license out on a per-device basis. We support devices Windows 8 and up. And you get 30 days of cloud retention for up to 1 terabyte of data on the endpoint. Really just want to help folks shore up some of those gaps when it comes to protection for that mobile workforce. You can see just an example of that interface. And when we talk about kind of the enhancement of that file level agent, it has been hardened. We recognize that these devices may not always have static or steady internet connections. They're well equipped for devices dropping in and out of a Wi-Fi signal, folks that are traveling on planes, trains, and so forth. So it's not going to give you a lot of those hanging backup jobs. It's equipped to handle that varying and sometimes unreliable connections. A simple cloud-based portal provides you with the ability to perform recoveries. There is multi-tenancy enabled if we have service providers, managed service providers that have joined us this afternoon, or if folks are billing other departments within their organization for IT services provided. That's another component here of the Unitrends Cloud Backup piece. The other piece of the Unitrends Cloud is that long-term retention of that data that's coming from your data center. And again, it's easy to predict from a year-over-year TCO standpoint because the licensing is granular and a la carte. The only two criteria that Unitrends cares about when it comes to licensing out retention in the Unitrends Cloud is how much raw data will you be sending to us. So what's that footprint look like locally before any deduplication or compression? You license that out in 500 gigabyte increments, and you determine the retention period as well for how long we'll be storing those backup copies. We offer retention of 90 days, 1 to 7 years, even infinite, and we store the backup copies for you on a grandfather, father-son rotation schedule. So once that retention has been built, you will have access to your most recent 7 daily backup copies as well as the most recent successful backup from each of the last 4 weeks, 12 months, and a subscribed number of years. Obviously, with 90 days retention, you'd be getting the 3 months there, wouldn't have that 12 months. But you have access to some of those recovery points to save those key points, and those are accessible at any time from your local user interface. You can view all of the recovery points that you have within the cloud target, immediately mount and create a share to download back individual items from the cloud target, or import the entire backup group to initiate full recovery of a client or a virtual machine from the cloud stack. Now, recovery from the cloud is all self-service for our users. Recovery in the Unitrends Cloud, as I had mentioned, is that disaster recovery as a service. And when we talk about that disaster recovery as a service, we call it white glove. Think really fancy restaurant, and you're being kind of taken care of from start to finish. And that's a lot of cases the experience for our customers today. About 1 in 3 Unitrends customers is a Unitrends Cloud user today. Enrolling in our disaster recovery as a service starts with an onboarding and work with our expert consulting group. We'll identify the protected systems, the recovery point, recovery time objectives, and our response requirements as that service provider. We have seeding options to get larger data sets into the Unitrends Cloud without having to send terabytes and terabytes over the WAN. And then once that data has been seeded, we work through with our customers to identify things like the boot order dependencies, networking configurations to mirror that production environment, firewall rules and settings, the provisioning of public-facing IPs where those may need to be available to host a website out of our data center, as well as the application-level tests that we will execute during our automated DR testing. We continue to perform that automatic or that ongoing testing. We're monitoring resource utilization, replication to make sure that we're receiving that data. And the failover has been fully tested. When we receive that declaration, we are fully prepared and have already mapped through what our response is going to look like. There are 3 levels of Unitrends disaster recovery as a service, and we're so confident in our processes and in our service, we will put our money behind it. They are money-backed SLAs. The 3 levels of the service are Premium, which carries a 1-hour RTO SLA, Elite, which is a 24-hour SLA, and Standard, which is a best effort. Any level of this service can be licensed on a per machine or a per instance basis. You can also license Standard DRAS against replicated volumes, that same 500 gigabyte increments of protected capacity as licensing the Unitrends cloud for retention, any machine that's eligible to be enrolled within that replicated volume can be enrolled in the DR as a service. With our premium service, for example, you're getting weekly recovery assurance testing and reporting, a very robust instance, 24 vCPU and 128 gigs of RAM on reserve in the cloud for you per machine. Those are allocated out in advance. In some cases, we will provision replicas, test instant recovery to ensure that we're able to meet that SLA. We have never missed an SLA in our 6+ years of performing this service. The longest it's taken us to boot a customer machine was about 18 minutes. It was a multi-tiered ERP application for one of our clients. And so when we talk about kind of what that service looks like here, you're running your typical workloads out of the Unitrends cloud, and user traffic is being directed at your site or at your data center. When the local site is unavailable, your sole responsibility initiating the spin up in the Unitrends cloud, is making a phone call to our support center, again based right here in the U.S. From there, we will initiate that boot sequence and provide you with an IPsec VPN tunnel to reroute that user traffic to the DR site. And we'll continue to take backups as you start running in the Unitrends cloud. When you are ready to rebuild or fail back to the local site, we're going to seed all of that backup data on a brand new appliance and overnight that to your location. You can start to re-import the data and begin that local recovery while still running out of the Unitrends cloud stack. When you are ready to switch back to the local site, we're going to tear down some of those last changes and again overnight those to you so that you can import that backup data, restore it to the appliance, and then push those updates out to the production network through one last final sync, bringing systems online and then rerouting that user traffic to return to the production site. We send a prep kit to capture future changes for failover. One of the questions that we get a lot is, Unitrends, that sounds pretty cool, nice little service that you've got there, but has anyone ever actually had to use it? So I had mentioned a multi-tiered ERP application that we had spun up for one of our customers, and that was these folks here, Safety Products. They are an equipment and a device manufacturer based down in the Lakeland, Florida area that had been attempting to establish replication between their Florida site and another location in Georgia, but were struggling to get some of those native tools with VMware working in concert with the current solution that they had at the time. And there were three key workloads: physical Windows clients, Linux, as well as some virtualized Windows servers. Finally, having enough of VMware and their failed replication, opted to look for a new way of doing things. They opted to deploy Unitrends virtual appliances, replicated to the Unitrends cloud, being right in Hurricane Alley, and enrolled some of those mission-critical workloads in our disaster recovery as a service. Back in 2017, as Hurricane Irma was building steam and kind of barreling up the Atlantic, 5 days before landfall, having tracked the storm and recognizing that their location was in the primary path of that storm, their CTO, Dennis Hershey, called Unitrends and declared a declaration. They rerouted employees. They got them to either safe locations out of the storm path or relocated them to that second location in Georgia, and failed over operation from their Florida site to the Unitrends cloud. They continued to run during the storm. When the storm had passed through and they were ready to return to the local site, we worked through to help them gracefully fail back operations. They also made a declaration this year with Hurricane Dorian earlier this year in 2019. So a couple of times have leveraged Unitrends DRAS when that primary site had been threatened. Case study that you can check out and read a little bit more about on unitrends.com, that being Safety Products. The last piece here, and really providing us with the proof and the confidence in our ability to recover, is what we call recovery assurance. It's automated application level testing. We're not just benchmarking compliance here, but we are benchmarking the results of application-specific scripts. We want to test the underlying applications or services within the backups that we've created. So as you're testing within this environment, you could say, for example, spin up a SQL host and run a query with an expected output, verify the status of an instance, test the database engine, test for Active Directory domain service, additional Windows services such as IIS. You can publish and post your website, ping tests between machines that may need to be orchestrated in concert to host an N-tier or a multi-tiered application. we've been running this recovery assurance level of testing for a number of years for our cloud-based customers, almost 12,000 tests per quarter, about 50,000 per year we're running in the Unitrends cloud. But it's also, based on feedback from our community, something that we've enabled locally as well. You can set this job to run on demand right from your local appliance. You get compliance and application status reports that are easily exportable into PDFs or CSVs. What you're looking at here is kind of that breakdown of that process and detailing each recovery step, where you can define things like boot order, again, test that networking dependencies, reconfigure machines, re-IP them. In effect, fully testing that failover. It's such a layer beyond that screenshot verification. We've worked with customers that had come over from screenshot verification, and hey, you know, they brought us to the login screen. They didn't log in, though. We had no way of knowing what was waiting for us. It could be, you know, a corrupt instance or a bad backup. It could be worse. It could be ransomware. We worked with a customer that had logged in from a backup only to find that backup was infected. Ransomware, in a lot of cases, is not going to disable the boot volume in the OS. It wants you to be able to log into that machine so that they can make their demand. Screenshot verification has no way of picking up or verifying the integrity of the underlying data. That's where Unitrends takes things a step further, giving you full visibility into what that recovery process would look like, and with the ability to proactively identify or detect any issues there might be with recovery. This is also where you could scan drives and folders for malware with our Clam AV antivirus tool. You can run your own custom scripting. If there's not a script that's just right for what you're looking to test out of the 50 plus that we've preloaded and scripted in there, you can build your own custom scripting through PowerShell as well. So at this time, as we're moving towards the Q&A, I really wanted to thank everyone again for joining us here today, and hopefully I have been able to demonstrate here how Unitrends can be that single vendor approach, not just from a local backup standpoint, but also under our umbrella with the ability to enable you with offsite recovery, long-term data retention management, even that disaster recovery as a service. We've built a lot of automation and attempted to streamline some of these bulk operations, the example earlier from our SLA policy engine, to make it less work for our users. You rack, connect, and go. The appliances come pre-configured. You just plug them in, give them an IP address, and start taking backups. Everything that we are doing, both locally and in the cloud, again, is being certified by that recovery assurance process. We talked a little bit about the security of the platform, that hardened Linux operating system, threat detection algorithm on the front end, and again, our support center is right here in the U.S., Columbia, South Carolina, available to you 24/7 by 365. So at this point here, I'd like to turn things back over to Howard for the Q&A. I'm also going to post a couple of helpful links. If you'd like to get in touch and speak to one of our Unitrends sales experts, our toll-free line as well as our contact form is posted there. You can request a personalized demo and take a drive through the user interface, see some of its simplicity for yourself. We offer full-feature trial licensing as well that you can download and run that full-featured trial, as well as feeling free to reach out. Again, my name is Adam Margette. My email address is posted there. If you have any follow-up or any questions, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So again, thank you, everyone. With a few minutes to go, I'm going to turn things back over to Howard for any Q&A that's on the line here.
Great. Thanks, Adam. We only have a few questions, but as a matter of fact, we just received one, which reminds me to tell everybody, if you have any questions, just enter them on the console. Hit the Q&A, and we'll be glad to answer as many as we can. We have a bit of time to do that today. The question that just came in is a very tactical one. How do you detect if files have been encrypted?
So that's a great question, and what we're doing is encryption is one of the pieces that we are looking at, and the appliance will know, which backups have been encrypted, which backups we've applied with our encryption. What our algorithm is looking for are changes in behavior. Things that are indicative of threat conditions or symptoms of ransomware. So we're evaluating things like change rates, the overall entropy, or the randomness of the data. A lot of the customers that we've worked with and have helped recover from ransomware attacks have shown symptoms of high Shannon entropy, large influxes of randomized data. All of a sudden, that nice structured data doesn't seem to make sense, and it looks different. We've observed different things like density and also testing the level of encryption. So when we're detecting those potentially anomalous or those threat conditions, there are a number of characteristics that we're looking at in addition to the encryption.
Great. Okay, one of the questions, you mentioned the 3 different levels of service available. The question came in as, can we enroll some servers in standard DRAS and others with an SLA?
You absolutely can. Absolutely can. You can mix and match levels of service on a per machine or a per instance basis to best meet the needs of recovery for your organization. I'll give you an example. There was a customer that we onboarded earlier in the spring. They're an audiovisual rental service out of just outside of New York City, so they're dealing in production, lighting, camera, staging equipment. They opted to enroll only 2 of their machines. While they seeded the full data center in our standard DRAS, they upgraded to an SLA, their point-of-sale systems, and their accounting software, so that if anything went wrong locally, they could bring up the environment, but they wanted the ability to maintain the best that they could, those front-of-store operations. So those were folks that were a little bit more selective, but you can absolutely mix and match levels of service to find the right balance of SLA and response time for your budget or your organization.
Great. Okay, next question up. I had spoken about the fact that many cloud providers have multiple data centers geographically located, all over the planet. Somebody asked, where are Unitrend's data centers located?
And we'd be in line with some of those other providers. We do operate multiple data centers across 5 countries. So we have cloud locations in the U.S., Canada, Germany, the UK, and Australia. Similar as well, Howard, there are measures for redundancy and replication built in with these cloud data centers, but as well we'll adhere strictly to data sovereignty laws, so we will not be replicating data outside of the country of origin. And I think I had mentioned earlier, but these are SSAE 18 certified data centers. They meet the mandates for SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, CGIS, GDPR, a number of others. A full list of locations, controls, and the other compliance standards met can be found online at the Unitrends Cloud FAQ. If you search unitrends.com for the Cloud FAQ, that details a lot of the information about the locations and some of the security measures in those or at those cloud locations and environments.
Great. Okay, so just mentioning to everybody again, I'm down to my last question with a bit of time left to go. So if you do have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. This question, I think you started really to answer this during your presentation, but I'm sure everybody would like a little more detail. How are Unitrends appliances licensed?
That's a great question. The Unitrends, so the physical appliances are a capacity-based licensing model. So with regards to our recovery series, those physical purpose-built backup appliances, there are 15 models, and they range from 2 to 120 terabytes of usable capacity. The license on those appliances is a no-limits license. So you have unlimited agents, hosts, sockets, whatever you need to back up that particular data set, more based on the size of the capacity, is going to be included for you. There are no additional needs to deploy a proxy server for reporting, secondary storage for deduplication. Those deduplication and compression engines are built into the appliance. So speaking to that all-in-one piece there, it comes truly ready to go out of the box, so to speak. The software is licensed on based on the resource count. So if you're licensing out virtual servers, you would be licensing out the hypervisor hosts by their socket count, so the number of populated CPU sockets within the physical host. You have unlimited number of guests, unlimited number of application or other agents as necessary if you need to install them into the guest OS to perform more granular protection. But the licensing itself for the software appliance would be on a per resource basis with unlimited agents, no additional fees there.
Terrific. Okay, well, that is the last question that I have for you. I would just remind everybody, this is all about self-discipline. This is all about vigilance. Your data backup is one of the most important items in your life. You don't know that until you have a disaster or a sudden down or a ransomware attack or some other disaster befalls you. But at that moment, you'll say, oh, my, Howard was right. This is terrible. And my suggestion to you is to protect yourself from ever having that experience. And the easiest way to do it, number one, test your restore frequently. Unitrends can give you a tremendous amount of help in doing restore testing without incurring any disruption of operations. The other thing, of course, is obey the 3-2-1 or the 5-2-1 or the dozens-to-1 rules to say that have a backup local and have multiple backups remote in addition to your primary data. I want to thank Adam Margate for giving us some great information and just offer it to you. Adam, do you have any last comments?
No, Howard, I think you summed it up absolutely perfectly. I would just say thank you again for everyone that joined us, and thank you as well, Howard, for having us on today. It was a pleasure.
It was great. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Howard and Adam. You did a great job today and provided a lot of very useful information to our audience. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And I'd also like to thank the audience for attending today's webcast, sponsored by Unitrends and presented by Redmond Magazine. With that, I'd like to close out the event. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.